Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Hewitt podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify or wherever you listen. It's Monday the 3rd of June in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, South Africa's ANC is forced into coalition talks for the first time since taking power 3 decades ago.
Investors tell Bloomberg they fear a second Trump presidency could erode the Fed's independence.
Plus, Emmanuel Macron wants to strengthen France's global influence. We look at why unrest on an island territory thousands of miles from Paris is a huge test for that ambition.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
South Africa's ruling African National Congress has begun talks with its rivals to form a government. The move comes after the party lost its parliamentary majority for the first time since Nelson Mandela led them to power at the end of apartheid in 1994. The leader of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, says the result is a sign the South African people wanted more cooperation between major parties.
What this election has made plain is that the people of South Africa expect their leaders to work together to meet their needs. They expect the parties for which they have voted to act and work together for the good of everyone.
Ramaphosa's ANC got a vote share of just over 40%, down from more than 57% 5 years ago. The electoral shake-up has pushed Africa's most industrialised nation into uncharted territory. The ANC will likely be forced to cooperate with bitter rivals, the Democratic Alliance, the Economic Freedom Fighters or the new party of former President Jacob Zuma.
Keir Starmer will pitch Labour as the party of national security today in the UK, ahead of a TV election debate with the Prime Minister tomorrow. The opposition leader is looking to draw a line under a public row over the candidacy of the veteran MP Diane Abbott. Starmer now says that she is free to stand as a Labour candidate, and Abbott has confirmed she will. Here's the Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Diane has been, continues to be a really important figure in the Labour Party, not just because of the trailblazing people have talked about, but also some of the things she did. For example, she was crucial to exposing the Windrush scandal and holding the government to account on that.
Yvette Cooper speaking there to the BBC. Diane Abbott has been an MP since 1987, when she was the first black woman to be elected to the House of Commons. She was readmitted to the Labour Party last week following a suspension over comments she made about racism last year.
Claudia Sheinbaum is expected to become Mexico's first female president in a landslide victory. 3 exit polls show the Morena party receiving between 58 and 63% of the votes. Sheinbaum's mentor is the popular outgoing president Andrés Manuel Lopez Obrador, but AMLO leaves office having allowed drug cartels to expand their influence across Mexico, resulting in record murder rates as well as the large fiscal deficit and the world's most indebted oil company, the state-owned Petróleos Mexicanos. The Mexican peso has been the strongest performing emerging market currency over the past 2 years, and the prospect of continuity under Sheinbaum has helped keep the peso steady.
A survey by Bloomberg has shown that investors are worried about the Federal Reserve's independence if Donald Trump is elected US president in November. 44% of those responding to our Markets Live Pulse survey said that they expect the former president to politicise the central bank or limit its powers if he returns to the White House. They also expect volatility in the bond market in the event of a Trump victory, with around a quarter seeing 10-year US Treasury yields jumping by more than 25 basis points.
Nvidia is planning to upgrade its AI accelerator chips every year as it seeks to broaden its customer base beyond cloud computing giants. CEO Jensen Huang has announced the new Blackwell Ultra chip for next year and the development of an AI platform called Rubin for 2026. He made the announcements during a speech in Taiwan.
Your future laptop, your future PC will become an AI. It'll be constantly helping you, assisting you in the background. The PC will also run applications that are enhanced by AI. And your PC will also host applications with digital humans that are AIs.
Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang there speaking at the Computex conference in Taiwan. He compared the rise of AI to the Industrial Revolution. The chipmaker expects to play a major role as the technology shifts to personal computers.
The price of oil has swung between gains and losses after OPEC Plus set out a plan to restore some production. Ministers meeting in Riyadh agreed to extend production cuts into the third quarter, while also laying out a 12-month timeline to bring some barrels back online. The news came as geopolitical tensions from the Middle East to Ukraine have raised concerns about supply in recent months. Now, in a moment, we're going to talk about the crisis in the French overseas territory of New Caledonia. But first, let's go to election results and what they will mean for South Africa. The ruling African National Congress has begun talks with rivals to form a new government after losing their parliamentary majority, one that they held for 30 years since the end of white minority rule. The main opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, secured 87 seats. Jacob Zuma's new party garnered 58 seats, and the Economic Freedom Fighters, led by Julius Malema, won 39 seats. Just as a reminder of the outcome from the vote, joining us now is Bloomberg anchor Jennifer Zabasaja, live from South Africa. It's a historic setback for the ANC. Why did it happen? What's the thinking, firstly?
Absolutely. I mean, if we think about over the past 30 years, I mean, the ANC was largely riding on this idea. And really, it was true that they did liberate the country. But I think if we just take a look at what the past few years have been under the ANC, there's been a number of people accuse them of economic mismanagement. We've seen the economy stall in many ways. Unemployment has been north of 33%. And you can tell based on the voter turnout and really the support for the ANC that voters are quite fed up with what they've seen over the past few years and want to see a change. And that's really what we are interpreting based on these results.
So what might a coalition government look like? Who does it appear the ANC are and aren't talking to?
Right. So that's the big question, Stephen. And it's interesting because going into this election, the hope for the ANC was to get above closer to that 50% threshold. They clearly have not gotten that. It's closer to 40%. So they are going to need to tap into some of their bigger rivals. And I'm talking about the main opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, which did pretty well with 21.75%. But potentially, they could look to the EFF party, which is the more leftist populist party. Or even, a stretch could potentially be former President Jacob Zuma's MK party. Now, the concern and really the discussions that are going to be beginning today is how would these coalitions work? The Democratic Alliance has said they are willing to work with whoever supports the Constitution and aligns with them. The ANC has said they are willing to talk with all parties, but they are saying with the caveat that, President Cyril Ramaphosa is not going to step aside. And that has been a condition that we have heard from former President Jacob Zuma's party, MK. They are willing to work in a coalition, but they would like Cyril Ramaphosa to step aside. And so you can only expect the negotiations that are beginning today are going to be quite difficult. But, all sides are potentially going to need to make compromises in the next 2 weeks in order to form this next administration.
Yeah, absolutely. Time very short. The Parliament has to elect a new president in a fortnight. How do you think financial markets and ratings agencies are looking at this in terms of the policies that are most important for the new government and what this coalition might look like?
So, the biggest thing that markets are really wanting and were anticipating going into this election was somewhat of policy continuity. We had seen the ANC under Cyril Ramaphosa, their latest policy somewhat bearing fruit in recent weeks and months. The electricity outages have declined somewhat. And we're also seeing some positive signs in terms of economic growth. So they would like to see that continue. And that is where the main opposition party has been favorable for the markets. Now, the concern is potentially if we do see some of these more leftist parties coming in and demanding things like the finance minister to step aside, or, some of their economic demands have been land expropriation without compensation, nationalizing the central bank and the mines. And so investors are really paying close attention to what these negotiations are and also the concessions that are going to need to be made. But ultimately, they want to see a continuation, of the growth that this country is very much in need of.
Jen, we mentioned that 14-day deadline there. I wonder if you could just talk us through the sort of key elements to watch in the next couple of days.
Right. So today is really going to be closely watched because we are going to see the ANC's National Executive Committee, which is essentially the top 7 members of the party, meeting and to talk about the next steps, who they could potentially work with, what their terms are, and what is off the table. And so after that, we are anticipating more meetings to be happening. Our understanding is that a number of these parties were meeting over the weekend. Some were meeting with one another. But yes, by midweek, by the end of the week, we're going to need to have some clarity as to who is talking to who and what decisions are going to be made in order to form this government. Because as you mentioned, Stephen, there is 2 weeks under the Constitution where they need to form this next government.
Okay, Jennifer Sabasaja, thank you so much for being with us this morning and taking us through, the importance of that South African election, of course. I mean, it is a hugely important moment for the most industrialised nation on the African continent, of which of those partners actually the ANC is going to choose. The EEF on the kind of extreme left, as it were, with Julius Malema as leader, talking about taking land without compensation, I think is very interesting. A Democratic Alliance, could that be a sort of supply and confidence alliance? Maybe that has been discussed.
It's uncharted territory for South Africa's democracy, and in either way this is going to have to prompt a renewal of how the ANC does business. It's not used to being a coalition partner, so that's going to be something that's going to be an interesting path for how the party handles things going ahead. Just looking at the market reaction as well, we had that strengthening in the rand after we got the first indications out of those votes last week, and the rand really remaining with that, holding on to those gains that we saw in the currency last week as well. So the market's very closely watching how those coalition talks go and what sort of policy mix whatever coalition agreement is drawn up may produce, and what that means for the future of the country's economy as well.
So that, the latest then when it comes to the vote in South Africa. Let's also turn our attention, though, to another feature story that we have this morning on the French overseas territory of New Caledonia, which is in the South Pacific. This is a hugely important story that perhaps has gone a little bit under the radar. Obviously not in France, but perhaps here in the UK. The territory of New Caledonia in the South Pacific is a cluster of islands, and it's now back under the control of French authorities. It saw deadly violence in May and a state of emergency imposed after decades of tensions between those seeking independence for the islands and those loyal to France. The islands are key nickel producers, but they also suffer from deep economic inequality. Joining us now is Eddie Spence, our commodities reporter based in Jakarta. Eddie's been writing about this story. Good to have you with us. Firstly, I suppose, for anyone who doesn't know what has happened, what triggered the riots in New Caledonia?
Well, essentially, they wanted to change the electoral laws to allow people who had emigrated to New Caledonia, in some cases like many decades ago, to actually be part of the voting system there. Previously, they weren't actually able to do that as part of kind of agreements that were made between the independence parties, who are largely backed by the indigenous Kanak population, and the loyalist parties. That was kind of the compromise, and they wanted to shift that compromise to allow people who'd lived there for at least 10 years to actually be able to vote in the regional elections. And that's what triggered the violence, essentially, because Kanak people, who again are the indigenous people, have been there for 1,000 years, were worried about having their control of the voting system there jeopardized by adding in a whole new group of arrivals to the electorate.
Emmanuel Macron made the trip to New Caledonia as part of this crisis. What role did his visit play, and what is the situation like there now?
Well, the situation is better now. We've had thousands of police arrive, some from mainland France, some from Tahiti, essentially just to stop the rioting, which was incredibly severe. I mean, in the space of a few weeks, 7 people have died, billions of dollars of damage have happened. So Macron's visit was obviously kind of symbolic in some ways that just showed that the mainland was helping to restore order. Whether it actually is going to help lead to a long-lasting resolution to this crisis is another question. In some ways, him turning up for less than 24 hours, if anything, has slightly riled some of the pro-independence political parties there. And I mean, also just his approach to this whole issue in the first place of trying to push through this change to the electoral laws. Earlier, he pushed through an independence referendum on the territory, which the pro-independence parties wanted delayed because it was during the COVID pandemic. Traditionally, they would have quite a long period of mourning for their dead. He pushed that through. It's kind of in keeping with his overall political strategy of just trying to move fast on difficult political issues. It worked in the case of the pensions reform in France last year. In this case, seemingly it hasn't worked. They haven't actually managed to push this through yet. The threat of violence is re-emerging, is still there.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.